a panel of professionals who can really speak with great inspiration, and not just great inspiration, but information pertaining to many of the things that are swirling in our community, as well as, for that matter, in our country, about this vaccine, about the vaccines. We know that there are several that have made it to market thus far. Pfizer's one, Moderna is another, Johnson & Johnson has one in the work. There are several others. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to just ensure that people of color, and I am being very clear, is to make sure that we have the information that is needed in order to make a more informed decision. So listen, we welcome you to this platform. I'm so glad to have you. It's my prayer that for those of you who are on social media, that the thing that you will do is that we ask that you like and share. Share this with your family, share this with your friends, especially for those of you who have been contemplating getting the vaccine. And so one of the things that we're going to do is that we're going to talk tonight about what I've kind of coined or called the 19, I believe, most important questions of the COVID-19 vaccine. And so with that being said, what I'm going to do is to ask our panel to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Dr. Johnson. We'll go with Dr. Spates. We'll go with Dr. Floyd. And then we will culminate the introduction with Mr. Jacob. So we'll start with you, Dr. Johnson. Just take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, on and so forth.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I am Dr. Kim Barbell Johnson. I call Jacksonville home after coming to Jacksonville decades ago to train. I was born in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, and grew up in the Caribbean with Caribbean upbringing, pretty traditional Caribbean upbringing before going to school at Hampton University, earning my master's at West Virginia University, earning my medical degree at NSU, finally ending up here in Jacksonville, where I trained at the Mayo Clinic, Jacksonville. It has been my pleasure to serve the Jacksonville community and to be involved in the Jacksonville community, both in medicine and in organized medicine, clinical medicine and organized medicine. But about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to be involved in clinical trials, something that was part of my training at Mayo and something that was welcomed in my life when I had the opportunity. So for the last 10 years, I've actually been the principal investigator, a physician scientist, if you will, leading trials, international biopharma trials in both the vaccine space and in the space of other therapeutics, and have learned quite a bit about the need for us to have representation in clinical trials and in clinical research, and the need for us to share the information about clinical trials and clinical research. So it's my pleasure to be here to share some of my experience from that point of view as a member of this local community, as a member of, as a person of color, and to be part of this auspicious panel. So thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Spates, if you will.
Good evening. I am Dr. Jocelyn Spates. I am a resident also of Jacksonville, Orange Park. I am in between two cities, and I am also the Associate Dean and Professor at the College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at Florida A&M University. I am a proud Rattler. I must put that plug in. But I am so happy to be here today. I am a pharmacist. I practiced clinically for many years and now am an administrator, teaching and training pharmacy students. So I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spates. Dr. Willis.
My name is Floyd Willis. I am a primary care physician, family medicine doctor at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. I have been on staff for about 28 years. I hail from Middle Georgia, a little town called Forsyth, Georgia. I left there and I went to Yale University undergraduate and back to Morehouse School, medicine for medical school. And I did my training at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And after a short stint in Georgia, I moved here about 28 years ago. I practice good old primary care medicine, but I have had the great fortune of being involved in our medical training program. We have had a training program for more than 20 years. And I have gotten the opportunity to be involved in some community-based research projects, mostly focusing on enriching research projects, particularly Mayo Clinic projects, with underrepresented minorities. Sometimes we are a little reluctant for very good reasons to participate in these kinds of trials. And I am just very happy and pleased that I was invited to participate tonight. I really believe that knowledge is power, and I believe that medical knowledge is power. So it's important to transfer this information, and just pleased to be here to share my thoughts about this subject matter.
Thank you, Dr. Willis. Mr. Jacob.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Linz Jacob. I am the healthcare supervisor with Walgreens. Been in the role of pharmacist, practicing pharmacist for almost 18 years. And in the supervisory role for clinical and pharmacy operations for the Northwest Florida, which include a couple of districts here in Jacksonville, Gainesville, Tallahassee, and I go all the way to the Panhandle. Born and raised in India, I moved to US in 2000 and moved to Jacksonville in 2002, and Jacksonville is home since then. I'm really privileged to be part of this discussion and panel, and able to share some of our experience that we went through as part of this process, because we are really into the fourth week of actual hands-on administration process of this vaccine. So we'll be able to provide some insights into hopefully remove some of the fears and give you some truths about the knowledge of the vaccine that we have.
That's just awesome. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. I'm just so glad to have this esteemed panel in, and what we're going to do is that we're going to get it started right now. And so if you will pull the first question up, and this question will, Dr. Johnson will ask you to respond to this question, and we would ask Dr. Spakes to follow up. Can someone, or can either, we're asking both of you to give us a brief explanation, and let me say this to both of you doctors, is that if you would put it, make sure that these are lay people in layman term. Sometimes we feel as though that we need a medical thesaurus sometimes when we're talking to our medical professionals. So, but the question is, can you take us through the explanation, simple explanation of, the phases that a vaccine goes through prior to being marketed?
Okay. Absolutely. So it's a great question, and Dr. Spates and I will take this on together. I'd like to just start simply because of what you said. We need some foundation that we're all speaking the same language and we understand. So it's true that both vaccines and other things, the FDA has a process by which studies are done before they are proved to be used in humans. So while those stages we will discuss in just a minute, I'd like to just kind of step back a little bit to explain that this is a process that has been going on with governmental involvement since the early 1900s. So it's something that we're all talking about right now with COVID, but the process by which we've been doing this has been both ordered in an organized way and has had some sort of federal involvement, be it by legislation or by commissioning over many decades. So we don't come to this vaccine approval or research space just within the last pandemic, as many people already recognize. And a lot of the tenets that we have used to bring drugs to market, to bring therapeutics or things that we treat with, to bring things that we test with to market, a lot of the same processes that we've used historically that have been used for decades, we continue to use, and we have used some segment or some way as during this pandemic, we brought that process into play in order to address the need for this COVID-19 disease. And with that, we have had the opportunity as researchers, and I'm not a specific researcher who has been in this space, but as researchers, we have actually had the idea of coming up with a way to treat a disease. And that is part of the research and development phase. So the idea comes about whatever it is that you're thinking about, whether it's a diabetic or hypertensive or vaccine. The idea comes in, that's the preclinical phase. And that preclinical phase is just kind of the excitement of being able to bring a novel or product to the medical space. Once that is done, then there's a process by which we get that process going for application to the FDA for final approval. And Dr. Spates can tell a little bit more about those few phases that we do pretty uniformly.
So there are 4 phases that drugs go through, and 3 of them happen before the drug is actually approved. So you have phase 1, and this is where you enroll about 20 to 100 individuals, usually healthy individuals, or it could be individuals who actually have the disease. And typically at this stage, you're really only trying to determine if the drug is safe. And then you move to phase 2. This is where you enroll more people. About 70% of the drugs actually make it to phase 2. And you enroll more individuals. And then you also are not only looking at the safety of the medication, but you're also looking at the effectiveness. Is it effective to treat the condition that you're trying to treat? After that, you move into phase 3. And about 33% of the drugs actually make it into phase 3. Again, more people are enrolled. You usually have a few thousand people or more. With these vaccines, we had 40+ thousand with the Pfizer and 30+ thousand with the Moderna in the phase 3 trials. Again, you're still monitoring safety and you're also determining the effectiveness of the product. After phase 3, the pharmaceutical company will put in what's called a new drug application. With that application, the FDA reviews it, and then they give the pharmaceutical company the yay or the nay. After that happens, the drug is marketed. You find it in your shelves, in your local pharmacies, or in your hospitals. And after that, in phase 4, it's the post-surveillance marketing phase. And in this phase, you're just looking at safety. Again, to make sure that the drug is safe, that it's being utilized the way it should be utilized. And all of those things are done in the 4th phase.
Okay, so it goes through a series of 4 phases is what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, and I think that will lead to the second question, which is this, and I think this is what we really all want to know, is that I know traditionally it takes several years. You know, I think on an average of 5 to 10 years to have a drug approved. And so with that being said, you know, to have a drug approved, with that being said, the question is, and it's not resonating, but here's the question, is that traditionally it takes 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine. How were these vaccines produced so rapidly, and were standards or steps omitted? And so, Dr. Johnson, we're going to ask you to do that, if you will answer that question.
Absolutely. So you are correct. It's a long process, largely because of what's required. Dr. Spates just talked about the multiple steps. And as you know, with the step, you have to do that step, have that step evaluated, and then you move on to another step. I'm going to talk about vaccines in particular because I think that's what most of us want to hear about. So if you look at what a vaccine does, what does a vaccine do? The vaccine mimics the thing that's causing the disease, right? So you need to create something that's going to mimic the thing that's causing the disease without it causing the disease. If you are going to do that, you have to have a lot of pre-steps and you need to think about the disease and how it affects the host. And there are a lot of conceptual things that need to happen. To do that ordinarily, we have had the benefit of multiple platforms. We've had the benefit of using parts of a virus. We've had the benefits of using the virus itself. We've had the benefit of using the genetic material of the virus and putting it into something else. And and we've had the benefit, like in toxoids and tetanus, to use the poison of the thing that causes the disease to develop. So as we have had multiple platforms, we have been able to, with the time that has been required to test these platforms, create these platforms, execute these platforms, and then to have the disease present to test whether they're effective or safe. We have been able to bring vaccines to market, usually, like you said, taking multiple years. I have a vaccine study, for example, for something that causes an illness in children. The vaccine is not for the child. The vaccine is for the mom who is, or the potential mom. So one of my studies, I vaccinate women who are of childbearing age. They don't have plans of having children. There's no pregnancy involved. They're of childbearing age, hoping that that study will allow me to see, once they get pregnant and that child develops and is now the age of the disease that I'm supposed to see, cytomegalovirus, which is probably 10 years from now, will that vaccine process prove to be what it's supposed to be? And because of that process, when I use an example like that, it will take time. There are certain diseases that you need that kind of time to see what you're testing. In this space, we were in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of people are concerned, rightfully, that this has been rapid. In fact, we developed a term for how we collected our thought leaders and our economic leaders to bring this to market using the word speed, Operation Warp Speed. And in doing so, it only added fuel to the fire of concern, because how could something that normally takes 10 years now take a year, less than a year? And what we recognize are, where are the roadblocks in this process? The roadblocks are funding, the scientific integrity and rigor that was needed. And once we got to that step first, we were able to bring thought leaders from around the world to work on this pandemic, because within 2 months of the presence of this virus in Wuhan, China, we had 200 countries impacted. So now we have the attention of the global scientific community working on the same thing while this virus is exploding right before our eyes. It created something that we'd never seen before, this international community and this collaborative that was allowing us to work together. And then we had the benefit in this country of creating a partnership between the government and the private partnered industries needed to fund a lot of the research and research aspects. And in addition to that, needed to create a rapid process to get through the FDA and to allow us to manufacture this vaccine. So in things that we would normally do one step at a time, we created a body of people. We brought a body of people together to talk about all the steps at the same time. And in fact, do some of the research, not one after the other, but in parallel. So while we've normally waited on phase 1 to finish before we do a phase 2 trial, phase 2 to finish before we do a phase 3 trial, we were at a place in this country, in this world, where we couldn't do that. We needed to make good decisions based on science that we knew, based on other coronaviruses, use that information in order to accelerate this process.
And if I will, and that's something that I want to go in on right there, is the fact that, SARS has been around for years.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when you look on the back of Lysol that we've been buying for years, one of the things that it says is that for Corona.
Right.
So, and I think SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then MERS, Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. I think MERS has been around maybe since 2012, SARS before then. So, and what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to keep it in layman's terms is what I'm trying to do. So with that being said, is that we were predisposed to SARS. Is that correct?
Well, what happened is the disease itself, COVID-19 or SARS or MERS, the disease itself we knew about. We had already had some experience with the virus that is responsible. In fact, when we were able to identify the thing that's causing COVID-19, the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, we recognized that genetically it was about 78% like the SARS virus. And so that's a 78% head start, right?
And not to interrupt you, but that's the point that I wanted to kind of drive home to the audience, is the fact that it was not like mumps or whatever, where you didn't have, you started from scratch.
Right.
But I mean, at least you had something to go by, which as difficult or as crazy as this is, it was probably one of the best strains to have as far as trying to come up with a vaccine as fast as we have. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's absolutely correct. And in addition to that, we had the disease to test the science happening at that time. And as you look at the studies and as you look at the results and everything that's reported on CNN, SNBC, and other places, when you hear things about what we've learned in these studies, it required the disease to be present so that we can test whether it is safe and efficacious, because that's how we are going to know. So all the stars aligned at the right time. The hiccup in these things is usually, I mean, we get in our own way. The hiccup is usually bureaucracy and other things, not only the science needing time. So once we were able to find a way to eliminate some of those hardships that normally happen, a decision was made to take a risk. The risk was, we don't have a lot of time to decide on a lot of things. What we need to decide is it worth it at this point, at the time that this decision was being made to develop these vaccines? Is it worth it to develop a vaccine, make that vaccine, manufacture that vaccine, not knowing if it's going to actually come to market or not? Never seen before. We've never done this before. A very novel process. It was a risk that, as you know, today paid off, because at least some of those who have been at the table at the beginning in this conversation are not only still at the table, but have already brought products to market. So it is unusual that we've been able to do this. It is unprecedented in scientific history, and it is unlike the other traditional ways that we brought vaccines to market.
Well, we are in most certainly some unusual times. And so, I think unusual times calls for unusual circumstances. I want to go to question 3, because this was something that interests me, and I'll hit you with this again, is that now I've heard that these vaccines are made in a new way using mRNA. Now, what does that mean?
Okay, so there are nucleic acid vaccines as a class. mRNA is a part of a nucleic acid. So where this vaccine is concerned, in the most basic term, we have other vaccines that we know about that were not made using this platform. I described other ways that we made vaccines. What we knew was that there was a potential that we can manipulate this process to create vaccines and to do other things in manipulating mRNA, this genetic product. We knew that because we've been doing that for 3 decades. In the cancer space, in the Ebola space, we've been working with this. So the mRNA vaccine platform was something that we had access to. We had scientists all over the country, all over the world, actually working in this space. This vaccine that we've brought, or these vaccines that we've brought using the mRNA platform, essentially is a way to take part of the genetic material that identifies the virus. So we've all seen those balls in the news with those little spike proteins on the ball. Instead of all of that, to create that, just like to create ourselves, there is DNA, RNA, there's genetic material that's required. What the vaccine is a part of the information, not about the entire virus, but about the protein. So
what it is part of the information about the virus.
Correct.
It's not the virus. Is that correct?
Correct. It is not the virus, and it is part of the information of the virus, in the same way that if we were going to take a bike and we wanted to recognize
and copy it.
Fine, right. We would take the wheel of the bike. The wheel of the bike is not the bike. The wheel of the bike is the wheel of the bike. But we're going to take the wheel of the bike, because when you see that spoked out wheel of the bike, you'll know that's the wheel that goes with that bike. And so we're going to take that wheel of that bike and introduce that wheel of that, the blueprint for the wheel of that bike. We're going to make that the vaccine. We're going to inject that vaccine into a person so that we inject that goes into the cell. The cell now makes the blueprint, uses the blueprint to make more wheels of the bike. Why do we want to make more wheels of the bike? Because that wheels of the wheel of the bike, or in this case, the spike protein, is what allows the virus to attach to a cell. You need to have the virus attached to the cell to make you sick. So if we can take advantage of the spike protein and create something that the body recognizes, we're going to create that spike protein so that should the body sees the real thing, the real bike with that wheel on it, it sees the real COVID-19 disease. When the body's introduced to that, the body's already prepared to fight that, because we've already created a way so that spike protein doesn't attack the cell. It's a very simplified way, because there's so much more that's involved, obviously, with creating immunity and long-lasting immunity, and some of those other questions we'll get to later, but that's essentially it. It's the mRNA is the blueprint for the wheel, the blueprint for the spike protein that enters the cell, so that the body's prepared the next time it sees the wheel to say, hey, that's the wheel, that's the coronavirus.
All right, awesome. Dr. Willis.
Yes, sir.
And I guess this is a part of question 4. Can you get, I think we just talked on some of that, but I would love to hear your comments on that on question 4. Can you get COVID-19 from receiving the vaccine?
The short answer is no. I would not want people to be afraid that they are going to get COVID-19 by taking the vaccination, particularly the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. As Dr. Barbell Johnson just explained, yes, there is a vaccine that's made and it is injected into the body. But the vaccines that are out now are using this mRNA to take that piece of the vaccine, that wheel, and sort of coach your body into learning how to fight off the infection. So the take-home message is, you should not and will not get the disease from the vaccine. Why is there a little bit of confusion about that? We have all heard the stories of ill people or pregnant people who can't take a certain vaccine. My doctor says not to take this. It's going to cause me a problem. Very often, that is because the vaccine is alive. The entire vaccine is alive. It's sort of beaten up and dead a bit, but they stick the real vaccine into your body, and your body learns how to fight off this disease. It's not the case with these 2 vaccines. It is not the organism at all. There are some people that are familiar with the flu vaccine and the old shingles vaccine, which actually are the virus. It's just dead. And they take that dead virus and put it into the body. And again, your body learns how to fight off the live virus. This is neither of those. It's not a live virus. It's not a dead virus. It's not even the virus. It's a piece of material, as Dr. Barbell Johnson talked about, that teaches your body. So you hear a lot of things, and it's frightening with regard to vaccines. And people worry quite a bit about it. But I think the real take-home message is you cannot get this disease from taking this vaccine. So people should be very comfortable with that part of this. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Let's move to question 5, and we'll bring you in on this one, Mr. Jacobs. The fast mutation of the flu virus requires a different vaccine formulation for every flu season. Would there be a need for an annual COVID-19 vaccine?
So, the clinical data is still being captured about the mutation. You probably heard about the mutation about, reports from UK about 3 weeks ago. So those data are being evaluated. And from an immunity perspective, that data is also being evaluated, because in order to come up with a booster dose every year, they need to test how long these immunity lasts. And we are still, like Dr. Johnson said, we are still learning about the effects and the immunity protection from the vaccine as we speak. So that data is not there. So we don't know if it will require an annual booster dose like a flu vaccine now, because that data is still being captured. So to answer that question, the data is still being analyzed. The clinical information is still being recorded for that answer. But I just want to add something to what Dr. Willis said and that question, because you might hear that, because based on the last 3 weeks data, you might hear that a couple of people got positive after getting the vaccine. And like Dr. Willis said, it is not from the vaccine, because we have to remember that we are still living, together with people that are COVID positive, and in an environment where the transmission is still happening. So this particular case, what happened was, they both the people that received the vaccination, they were actually tested negative on 2 days prior to the clinic, but I guess there was an active case of COVID happening in that location where the immunization happened, and the protection from the vaccine is not immediate. So it will take at least 4 to 6 days to build up that immunity. So if they are getting exposed to that virus during that time frame, there might be a chance that you will get the infection, but it is not coming from the vaccine. It is that environment that they were exposed to during that administration time. So I just want to call that out as part of the previous question too.
And thank you for that. I think that was good to bring that sense of clarity, because that's one of the first things that people would do. Well, I got it, I got the vaccine, but then I got the virus, on and so forth. And, we'll talk about later on, should we, to continue to wear the mask on and so forth. But thank you for sharing that. Question 6, Dr. Willis, a recent Pew Research Center poll reported that over half of African Americans said that they would not get the vaccine. What would you say to the Black community? And so that's question 6.
So this is a really important question. And what I would say to the Black community is the very same thing I said to myself about this issue. Months ago, back in May or so, I think when this Pew poll was done, 50% of the people said, maybe African Americans, maybe I will take this vaccine. As time went on, 30% of the people said, maybe I'll take this vaccine. And as time has gone on, 20% of Black people I think the most recent one said, I might take this vaccine, but lots of people are afraid of it. And before I tell you, I think a good reason why you should consider taking it, I have to pause for a moment to acknowledge the very long and tragic history that Black people have had with the United States healthcare system, not over the decades, but over the centuries. So fear and concern is rooted in reality and rooted in history. Bad things have happened. Most of these things are written down. Many of them are handed down generation to generation, all the bad things that happen at the hands of medicine. But things have changed. And I think there are a lot of people, a lot of healthcare professionals, people on this particular call, I think, support the use of the vaccine. And it's two, I think, critical facts I would leave. Number one, the National Medical Association, I will use them as an example. They're one of the leading voices for equality and fairness in medicine. This is the national group of Black physicians. They have looked through the data. A task force has looked through the data. They supported the early approval of these two vaccines. They looked at the side effects and thought that the side effect profile for Blacks was no different than other people. They looked at the efficacy, how effective it was, and thought that it was as effective for Black people as it was for other people. So I think, you will hear individuals like my colleagues and you, Dr. Williams, on this call, I think, that support the use of the vaccine. And you will see people at the national levels that will say Black people really should trust it. But I do understand the reluctance. Months ago, there was reluctance amongst everyone. So that's the first thing, acknowledging the history, and number two, acknowledging that people are embracing it even at the highest levels of organized medicine. But the third and most practical reason is that, and I would ask my colleagues on this call to assist me with this, I believe there have only been a half dozen, maybe even less, people who are thought to have died from administration of this vaccine. Maybe one or two out of the 5 million people or so that have taken it. And I don't think it was the vaccine. There's circumstances. They had a heart attack, something else happened. But 4,000 people per day are dying with COVID-19 every day. And unfortunately, a disproportionate number of them are Black and brown people. So I said to myself what I say to everyone else: the risk of not taking the vaccine might be much higher than taking it. And that is particularly true for groups of people who suffer more from it. And that is us. So it's a really important question. And lots of people are reluctant, not just Black people, all across the spectrum, age groups, political parties. Nope, we're not going to take it. But I think it's particularly important for we as Black people to look at it critically and make a really informed decision, because it has the risk of killing us more often, more frequently.
Thank you, Doc. We're going to move to question seven, and we're going to pitch this to you, Dr. Spates. To date, only a fraction of African Americans have been vaccinated. When can the general public expect the vaccine to be available?
Very good question, Pastor. And as you know, you all have been seeing in the media, as I have too, 20 million people were supposed to be vaccinated by now. And as of today, we have about 5.48 million people that have been vaccinated. And that's due to a variety of reasons, which you all have seen also in the media. It's not getting out to many of the clinics and some of the healthcare departments like it should be. There's also a lot of reluctance, as Dr. Willis has said, to getting vaccinated. So some people who have been offered the vaccine have not taken advantage of it. But currently we are in phase 1. And phase 1A is where the healthcare workers, as well as those in long-term care facilities, were to be vaccinated. Phase 1B was supposed to be essential workers. And then phase 1C were adults who had risk factors or those who were 65 or older. It is postulated that we'll be in phase 2 in April and hopefully phase 3 by May or June. And to my knowledge, I have not seen what those specific individuals, who those specific individuals will be in those phases to date on the CDC website. But the thought is that we will continue to immunize educators in the K through 12 space, as well as childcare workers, those in homeless shelters, and also young adults and children should be in phase 3. As you also know, the game has changed in the state of Florida. So those who were supposed to be immunized in phase 1A and 1B have not received the vaccine. And we can talk a lot about that because there are many healthcare providers who have not been vaccinated. So we're in a quandary in the state of Florida, but hopefully, we will begin to move in the right direction so that those who are definitely in direct patient contact can go ahead and become vaccinated. And then it will begin to be funneled out to the general public.
Thank you, Dr. Space. For those of you who have joined us, we are bringing this forum to you from Hopewell Church. And the mindset is to focus on the fears and the truths of the COVID-19 vaccines. We have 19 questions that we're going to go through. We're at our 7th question now. But as I mentioned, as I just said, that one of the things that I want to deviate just for a moment and just get you guys' take and on something that I've been hearing is, and I don't know which particular company wanted to to cut the dose in half. Now that was something that really, made my ears go up, and basically because I understand that the trials were not done on a half a dose or whatever. It was done on a full dose. So, I don't want a half a dose of the vaccine. I want a full dose. Whatever you studied, whatever went through those 4 phases of what you said, Dr. Spates, on and so forth. So, can one of you speak to that very quickly? One or more of you speak to that very quickly.
I'll just add that has been a discussion, and it's not unlike the discussion, unfortunately, of where we started in this COVID space, whether it was PPE or other recommendations that have just been a supply and demand issue. If the science is the science, like you said, if the studies say what the studies say, and emergency use authorization, not final approval, but approval was based on the data that we had, based on what we have. That is the science. I have the position on this issue, whether it's for Black, brown, or otherwise, that we don't know everything, but at every point we should ask, do we know enough? And enough that we know is based on the science, based on the data that we've had. From an interim analysis, from patients that were evaluated and data from last November, we know this disease is evolving. We know that this space is changing every day with information. You're absolutely right, Pastor. There is a problem when we're talking about stretching things based on supply and demand, because we don't have the data to support that. And I think that the companies, the sponsors of at least these 2 vaccines that are currently emergency use authorized, agree with that the data is the data. And we should stand on the data because they have nothing to support. There's no proof or data to support, and that anything else will help us. And so that is where politics and science get in bed together and bad things happen. And unfortunately, like Dr. Spade says, there were some good intentions, but they weren't good enough.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Anyone else before we move to the...
I would agree. You get some people get protection from the first shot, but it's not quite enough. The majority of the people get the protection from the second shot. So I agree with Dr. Barbell Johnson. It almost sounds a little political or economic or something when you start trying to stretch vaccine. It doesn't sound scientific and medical.
And I think that also it probably goes back to what you said, Mr. Jacobs, and the fact of getting the vaccine first, and then it has to take time to resonate in your system, and I guess that's the reason for getting the second round, a couple of weeks later. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. Were you directing that at Mr. Jacob?
Yes. I don't know if he can hear me or not, but.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, good.
And all vaccines, in fairness, are not 2 doses. There are vaccines that will probably enter the space as a 1-dose vaccine. But again, that is based on those phases that said it was sufficient. There was sufficient evidence in phase 1 trials to suggest that the body's response to creating a memory was sufficient based on that dose in that formulation using that platform. So it's not apples and oranges, in science, unfortunately. We really do need to look at the science and trust the science that we have.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. We'll move to question 8. And are the vaccines free, and how do you register to get them, Mr. Jacobs?
So the vaccines are covered, no charge, under the CARES Act. So every person living in the U.S. is eligible to get the vaccine free of charge. There is still an option where people that do have insurance, they will have to provide that insurance because it will be billed to the insurance, but there won't be any charge or bill coming to the patients. People that don't have insurance, they require us to provide some sort of ID, state issued or federally issued ID, because we have a process code where we will bill that code using that ID, and it will go up, come out with $0 copay for the patient. So the vaccine is covered by the CARES Act. Right now, like Dr. Spade said, we are in phase 1. That is pretty much assigned to healthcare workers and people living in long-term care facility. The process that we have for them is the long-term care facility have to register with CDC, and then they have to pick one of the partners to come to their site to provide the vaccine. So federal, nationally speaking, both CVS and Walgreens are part of that initiative. And once they get registered, they will be assigned one of those two, pharmacy chains to come and protect the patients in those facilities. There's also state receiving the vaccine, and state is utilizing the Department of Health. And in the state of Florida, just like Dr. Spade said, we are a little bit, they have changed some of the categories within those phases, and there is also some parts of the state, they are actually expanding to the 65 and older patients as part of the governor's executive order. So again, there is the challenges that we have right there for that scenario is the vaccine availability. We don't have enough vaccine to really open up and move into the phase 2 because it's all based on the CDC allocation. So right now there is no process to register, but when we get into phase 2, which will open up based on the CDC guidelines, which will open up for 65 and older. In that case, then they will be able to open up to all pharmacies. And just like we're getting a regular flu shot, the seniors will be able to go to the appropriate pharmacy and get the vaccine.
And so currently, 65-year-olds are able to register with the city of Jacksonville. And if they can get an appointment, they have been elevated and executive ordered to be able to get the vaccine. So just for clarity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. We'll go to question 9, and Dr. Spakes, we're going to throw this to you. And before I read it, I want to kind of lead in by saying now, I think the other day I saw where a pharmacist, someone left 500 vials of, one of these vaccines out, and the vaccine's spoiled. And so I want you to kind of touch on that. But the question is that the Pfizer vaccine has to remain in sub-zero temperatures while Moderna's does not. Should one vaccine be preferred over the other? And will the public have a choice?
Okay, with the pharmacist, just know that is not the typical characteristic of a pharmacist. We have a code of ethics that we are governed by, and to leave a vaccine out was completely unethical. So we take pride in what we do to make sure that the drug is safe and effective for every patient that gets it. So that was definitely an outlier. And I think it goes back to individuals feeling like this is a conspiracy theory. Not only do lay people feel that way, but we have many healthcare providers that feel that way as well. And they are doing things to thwart this process in terms of ensuring that the community can be vaccinated. But in terms of the two vaccines, in terms of preferring one over the other, they both are equally efficacious. So the Pfizer vaccine is about 95% effective. And then you have the Moderna, which is at 94.1%. So note that I did not say 100% effective. So that means that you can still get COVID, even with the vaccine. So you still have to practice social distancing and mask wearing and all of those other things that we'll talk about a little bit later. But there is still the probability. However, it is lower if you are vaccinated. And one other thing to note about the vaccines, the Pfizer is 21 days. So you have to get the second dose within 21 days. And the Moderna, you have to get the vaccine within 28 days. The Pfizer is a 30 microgram dose. The Moderna is a 100 microgram dose. Side effect profile is very similar among the two agents in terms of arm soreness, headache, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the side effects. But one of the things you mentioned is storage. And Pfizer does have to be stored in sub-zero temperature. And the facilities that have the Pfizer vaccine, they had to get freezers. They had to have those installed before they actually get the vaccine. I know the health department here initially did not have freezers, but they did get those. And they're in the process of, making sure that those vaccines are stored appropriately. And one other thing I wanted to note was in the studies, in the Pfizer study specifically, when they looked at their primary outcome, and when I say primary outcome, I mean, what were they looking at? What were they trying to prove? And they were looking to evaluate whether the vaccine could actually protect against COVID 7 days after the second dose. So 7 days after the second dose, they wanted to prove that the patient would be protected against contracting COVID-19. With the Moderna, the only difference is that they were looking at it 14 days after the second dose. So those were just some slight differences that they looked at in the clinical trials. So 7 days versus 14, but at the end of the day, they were 95 and 94% effective.
Now let me.
And I didn't answer your question, Pastor, I'm sorry. Let me make sure I close out with will the public have a choice? So the answer to that is no, because when the facility that you are going to gets the vaccine, they may get Pfizer, they may get Moderna. You don't know until you get there. And so you really don't have a choice in the matter. You could decide, I don't want to get it right now. I'll wait until you get Moderna, or I'll wait until you get Pfizer, but you run a risk of not being vaccinated at all. So you kind of have to go with the facility where you're going with what they have in stock.
And just quickly, being the devil's advocate, we're halfway through this forum, but being the devil's advocate, if I'm going to get the vaccine, I want Moderna because it's not, I read somewhere where it was either 80 or 90 degrees below zero. One of you, please help me out with this. So what do? You break it out to the freezer, you go straight and shoot it in somebody's arm. And I'm being somewhat facetious, but help to bring some clarity to those who are listening.
That I think is important to actually clarify. So a couple of things to clarify. One, we're talking specifically about these two vaccines because within very short order and in other places, there's actually another vaccine with another platform. So these vaccines will evolve. The discussions about the requirements are all related to the individual vaccine. The data is related to the individual vaccine and what data they brought forth. With regards to temperature, Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines are mRNA. We talked about this being DNA products. They're fragile things. They don't have the integrity, the hardiness that some of the other platforms that we've used. One of the challenges why we haven't used this in this space before, because they're very fragile types of things to work with. If you imagine an M&M, we package these viruses in like a chocolate coating, a lipoprotein molecule around it. And because they're two different companies, they have two different ways of doing that. One company has one way that's a little bit more hardy from their experience. One is not as hardy. So that vaccine will degrade and will not be as effective, will not be effective at all, as effective as what is reported. But this is for storage and transport. It has nothing to do with that vaccine being injected to you at a certain temperature. In fact, one vaccine is actually reconstituted. So it must be mixed with saline and then injected, left out to room temperature. There's a certain amount of vials in one bottle, and the other vaccine is already pre-made. So there are nuances in the vaccine. So while we're talking about them as if they're the same, and when they are delivered to you in the arm, they'll probably be pretty equivocal. As far as the integrity and making sure that these vaccines are administered correctly, stored correctly, that providers, clinicians are trained on the nuances of the vaccine, these are things that we have been doing for months, not even knowing what was coming to market. We have been mandated by the federal government, all jurisdictions, to start this training, to prepare, to buy refrigerators, to do all sorts of things, to register, so that this is a very important thing, so that we can actually be ready. At the delivery phase, you should just get a vaccine and hope that that vaccine was stored and prepared properly. But there's a lot in the background, like you said. And the part about temperature that's very important is that, we're in a very economically rich community where we can have refrigerators. There are places around the world, there are clinics in the world that cannot afford a -70. There are places in the hood that cannot afford a -70 refrigerator. We may have lots of that kind of vaccine available and not the others that they can afford. And that's a problem. It becomes a very social justice discussion, a health disparity discussion. But we need all the platforms. We need all of this at the table, but we can't miss the point that it creates potentially a process where everyone can't get whatever's available at the time. So when supply is limited, we must stay vigilant.
Thank you, Doc. Very, very well. I think you cleared up you cleared up some cobwebs for me. So most certainly, so I'm appreciative.
Me too cold.
Of that, and I pray for also you've cleared it up for those who are watching us. Let me shift gears. We're at question 10, and I'll start with you, Mr. Jacob, and then we'll go around the forum. Have you received the vaccine? So I'll start with you, and then we'll go from there.
No, I haven't received the vaccine. I was actually part of the first clinic that we did in an assisted living facility. And the whole reason why I did not receive the vaccine at that time was the limited amount of vaccine that was available to us. And I don't want to take a dose from the most vulnerable people that we are trying to protect in this phase. So that's the only reason why I didn't take it. And plus, I'm not in close contact with those patients on a regular basis. So so I could wait a little longer to get protected. Versus, and in that site, both my pharmacist and the technician that assisted that site got protected after the clinic was done. But we do the same thing across the board, where the people that are involved in the process physically provide an opportunity to get protected, and majority of them are getting protected.
All right, thank you. Well, we'll go from Dr. Willis, Dr. Space, and Dr. Johnson. I think I know the answer, but go ahead.
I actually got the vaccine about 10 days ago. I will be getting the second one about 10 days from now. Had very few, if any, side effects. The reason I think might be pretty obvious. There are some people who are on the front lines, and we are in contact with people, sometimes with them not even knowing that they have COVID vaccine every day. I'd like to draw the analogy, however, to a lot of my other friends, family members, community members who are also on the front line. They might not be seeing patients, but they are working someplace outside of an office where they can sit and remote in and work all day without having contact with people. So whether you're a healthcare provider or not, if you're out in contact with people all day, doing something in the public sector, teaching, working in a restaurant, where you really have to be in contact with people, I would say that's just as important as the nurses and the doctors. You really want to protect yourself and get this vaccine, because you are going to have a higher than likely risk of getting the infection.
And Dr. Williams, no, I have not received the vaccine. I am on the waiting list and I am ready. I am also not in direct patient contact, but again, I am in higher education where we have college students, throughout our building. So still we are at very high risk. So when my turn comes, I will be ready.
And I did receive the vaccine. There's a long story that's too long to share here, but unfortunately, I learned well what happens when someone gets left off, a group gets left out of a conversation. And unfortunately, in this town, Jacksonville, community physicians who are not associated with hospital, I'm in an outpatient community clinic serving in Arlington. Those clinicians were not part of the equation when the hospitals got their distribution. And so to have to fight, even though I'm a 1A, even though I have 3,900 COVID tests done since March, even though I have not had the opportunity to work from home, even though we have a 38% positivity rate the week after Christmas, I had to beg to get the hookup, to get I did that because I need to protect myself, but I did that also as a way to create the point that advocacy is needed, even when you are a physician, because there are people who will inadvertently or not inadvertently forget some of us at the table. And I think the one thing about getting the vaccine and having others who may not look like me, who were concerned about how did I get it and they didn't get it, I think for the first time they realize what happens when they're in the disenfranchised group. Because there are a lot of us who are just, actually my office actually did get the vaccine today, but last week when other groups that were not part of the CDC tier that was above those of us who were in first line patient care not getting the vaccine, I had to get a hookup. And I'm grateful for the hookup, but I shouldn't have had to get a hookup to get a vaccine.
That's right. And thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate so much that you're sharing that, because it goes to show you, and I don't want to get on this soapbox, but regardless of where we are, oftentimes people of color have to fight to get what comes normal to everyone else. And so, it just goes to show you, it makes not a difference, where you've matriculated at, where you've gone to school, what your accolades and credentials are, is that sometimes we're just treated differently. And I think that we need to make that known and most certainly make our voices heard. But so thank you for sharing that. We're going to keep you on deck, Dr. Johnson. Question 11, what are the specific benefits of getting the COVID-19 vaccine? Will it prevent you from contracting COVID-19? Will it prevent you from spreading COVID-19? So those are the questions that we are putting in your wheelhouse, Dr. Johnson.
I'm grateful for my sister doctor on this call who actually kind of led us to this space, and to others we've been talking, first of all, about COVID-19 and about the virus, SARS-CoV-2. We've been also talking about studies. So let's clarify one thing. The vaccine does not prevent you from getting the virus. The studies that allowed the vaccines to be emergency use authorized were not intended to show that you are not going to get the virus. The vaccine is intended for you not to get COVID-19, the disease. No one in the design of the study was tested routinely just to find out if they had positive test for COVID. So understand that we are talking about a vaccine to prevent you from getting a disease. In fact, there are two things that are happening in this COVID space: the decrease in the burden of death because of the disease, and decreasing the spread of the disease. Obviously, the spread of the disease will cause more hospitalizations and unfortunately more deaths. So they go hand in hand. But the vaccine is intended to prevent you from getting the disease. And that's important to understand, because that's a distinction that we need to understand, because you could be COVID positive. We don't have the evidence that you won't get COVID positive. It wasn't part of the study. When we have a study that shows that, I'll bring that information, but we don't have that evidence right now that you won't get COVID, you won't contract SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes the disease. Much like the flu, you may get a lesser version of the disease and survive it so that it decreases the impact of disease. And in fact, while Dr. Spates was talking about how things were tested when we looked at what meant you were positive in the study, it's important to look at the studies that we're talking about, because those studies actually asked how did they define COVID? How did they define COVID-19 in the trials? One trial said, if you have COVID-19, you must test positive and then have a list of symptoms. The other trial said you must test positive, which for most of us, you're positive, right? But you must have a respiratory symptom and a systemic symptom. So the definition of what each study called positive COVID, to say these are the number of patients who got COVID in our study, it's important to understand that there are little nuances, and the FDA was fine with it. In fact, I'm fine with it as a physician scientist, but the definition is the disease. We want to prevent you from being a symptomatic person who gets a positive test, have symptoms, so that you don't progress to worsen disease. So in the short form, the short answer is no. There's no evidence that I have that the vaccine will prevent you from contracting the virus. I'm hoping that the burden would be less, but there's a lot of information that we still don't have. And fortunately, this is just at the emergency use authorized state. These trials that we are talking about and the trials that will follow must go to completion and must provide the data so that we know what we have when we say 94 or 95% efficacy is an efficacy in a randomized placebo-controlled trial. That's not real life. In real life, we learned after the trial, for example, that certain people had allergic reactions. We didn't bring that to the FDA. They didn't bring that to the FDA because nobody in the trial had that. But after we saw it in more people and saw that something else happened that we didn't see in the trial, we now have some advice that clinicians use in advising patients with certain reactions, because we saw that after that information. So there's information that we will continue to learn, Pastor, about what, and that information has to be both from the sponsors, the completion of the trial, but it also has to be from all clinicians, all licensed clinicians, all patients who receive this vaccine. And that's why there's information. Once you get the vaccine, you get information about reporting your symptoms, reporting things that are happening to you. And it's important that we actually, if you get the vaccine, that you report that, because if you don't report it, people are going to say you didn't have the symptom. It's like if you didn't take a picture and post it on Facebook, it didn't happen, right? So it's important that we actually recognize that this is an ongoing conversation.
So you could very well get the vaccine and still be asymptomatic. Is that correct?
Correct. You could have gotten the vaccine and be, well, first of all, to get the vaccine, it's recommended that you're not sick, right? You're not sick with COVID. And there are some recommendations and some guidance. So you have that guidance, but it's not contraindicated. So it's the only recommendation that we have based on other science is that if you're going to get the COVID-19 vaccine, the two that are currently available, that there is some space between that and any other vaccine. If you're getting the flu shot, wait 2 weeks. Either after or before. So there is some guidance with regards to other vaccines, but we don't test everybody who's getting the vaccine for COVID because the studies, it wasn't significant in the study.
So touch on that just to make sure that I'm hearing you clear, because it's what I heard you say was that it'll prevent you from getting the disease, but correct, not the virus. Is that correct? Correct,
because we know very well, this is a very interesting virus. This virus is unlike some of its predecessors, in fact. And we are learning to this day things about the immune system as the immune system ages, things about what we're learning because certain groups of people are really having a harder time with this disease. It's the same virus. Why is that? And so we're taking all of that data, and even though we have created an effective vaccine to try to prevent that virus from attaching to a cell, hence decreasing the burden, there are still groups of people that we saw in the study that got sick. there will be more of those people that will get sick by the time that the data is out. And when whatever information that data shares is the information that we need to pay attention to. I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't want to say what that's going to say, but it's clear, the science is clear that this vaccine, like other vaccines, is preventing the disease. And if you should get the virus, you may still get the virus, but hopefully not have the disease.
Absolutely. Well put. Thank you for explaining that. Question 12, Dr. Willis, you said you got the vaccine. Like, my question to you would be, any side effects?
I, like a lot of people, got a little bit of swelling and a little bit of redness, a little bit of warmth at the site of the vaccine, but absolutely nothing else. It was all gone in about 6 hours. There are some people that will get some chills and some fever. Sometimes the second vaccine will give you a few more symptoms. But the take-home point, I think, Pastor Williams, is the symptoms are no more severe than what we would get with what occasionally comes with a flu vaccine or the shingles vaccine. They are not severe. They are not to the point that I've recommended any of my patients not get the vaccine if they are in a position to do so. So very mild symptoms, not necessarily treated with medications, but with ibuprofen, Motrin, Tylenol, rest. So I think that is a take-home message. Don't worry about the side effects of the vaccine if you're considering getting it. I don't think I know a single person who got it and came forth and said, I wish I hadn't done that. I was sick for a week. I haven't heard that at all. And I think the data would bear that out, that the 4 or 5 million incidences of immunization here in this country that just have not been a widespread side effects. A couple of severe things occasionally here and there, but on the whole, very, very minimal. So I hope that answers the question.
You did. Dr. Johnson, you got the hookup as well. So any side effects? I think we lost you, sir.
I apologize. I was blessed that it didn't have any side effects. I was hoping for a smaller waist when I woke up the next morning. It didn't happen. But seriously, and as I will probably just mention now, that with both vaccines that we know, while the side effects are mild, and most people have none, there are a few people who had severe side effects in the trials themselves, but the side effect profile is such that after the second vaccine, you actually the patients in the study seem to be a little bit more symptomatic. So it's important to warn patients so that they are aware that should they have no side effects, that it's still important to be vigilant for your second dose.
Awesome. Dr. Spates, question 13. I think this is a question that many people desire to know. Can pregnant or breastfeeding women get the COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, in the clinical trials, pregnant and breastfeeding persons were excluded. So they were not included. So we have no clear data. However, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists do recommend that if the patient is in the category, for example, if they're a healthcare worker, that the vaccine should not be withheld from them. So they can make the decision to get the vaccine, especially if they are in that phase 1B or 1A that we're currently in now. In addition to those who are breastfeeding, it is thought that the vaccine will not cause any risk to the baby. So it is thought that it is also safe for those people to get the vaccine as well. And the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists also state that it can be recommended to those who are breastfeeding or lactating if in fact they fall into that category or meet the criteria to receive the vaccine.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Spates. Listen, we're almost there. 19 most important questions of the COVID-19 vaccine. We're at question 14, and Mr. Jacobs, we will bring this your way. How are the COVID-19 vaccines distributed, and will they work on the variant? Unmute yourself. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I can only speak from vaccine distribution through the Operation Warp Speed, supporting the Operation Warp Speed. So currently, the way it's designed is, the state will activate the phase. So we are actually going through the phase 1B category, which is the expansion from all the skilled nursing facility to the assisted living facilities and the independent living facilities. So those are the ones that we are protecting right now. We are going into those locations. The vaccines are directly allocated specific to those sites based on the numbers that they registered with the CDC. So everything that we are currently doing is based on what is scripted from CDC and what's coming to us as an organization, and we are taking that product into those facilities and getting them protected. Anything. So, for instance, if we get an estimate from a facility that we are doing 80 patients, and we go to the site, and for some reason, we could only protect 70. So there's extra 10 doses. So we could pretty much take that extra 10 doses. And if there's no takers at that facility, we could actually take those 10 doses and go into those next categories, the healthcare workers within, that are going into the site. And also, if there's no takers in that group, in the state of Florida, we can actually also provide to the 65 and older. But it has to fall within one of those criteria before we could open up for that 65 and older. Some of the scenarios that we run into is, once the vial is mixed, it has to be used within 6 hours. So and each vial, you get, it's 5 doses from each vial. So if you are going into a clinic and you have 72 patients, to get to the last 2 patients, you have to mix that vial, and there will be 3 doses remaining, which won't be used in the facility, but it has to be used. It has to be put in somebody's arm within that 6-hour time frame from the time it was mixed. So those are the ones that we are currently using for protecting our pharmacists that are attending the site. Or if it's beyond that, then we'll take it back to the store within that 6-hour time frame and see if we can get a person. That's what's happening in the phase 1 and phase 1A and 1B. Moving into phase 2, that's when we believe that it is going to be opened up. The inventory is going to be pretty much replenished to all major providers, and you will be able to get access to it more frequently than what's happening right now.
So if those vials are open and I'm supposed to get my shot at 12 o'clock, I don't need to come at 6, is that right?
No, that's not the case. So we, like we said, we are very, very conscious about, making sure that we have zero wastage of the product. So every effort is done to make sure that we don't reconstitute. We only are working with Pfizer here, so we have to mix it with, like Dr. Johnson said, we have to mix it with normal saline. So we are not, we are just reconstituting only 1 vial at a time. Make sure that we have 5 lined up, ready to go, so that we are not wasting a single dose of the product. So our pharmacists are trained on that process. And they follow that protocol to make sure that every dose gets into somebody's arm. So like other vaccines, like a flu, we can actually pre-draw, or they comes in pre-drawn syringes, which there's no worry about them being spoiled after a certain time frame, as long as it is kept within that cold chain. But here, a lot of things are being monitored and followed to ensure that zero vaccine is wasted, and also every single vaccine is kept within those temperature guidelines that the Pfizer provides.
Well, that's good news. I didn't want to show up and they said, well, we got some left over, and we can use. All right. Well, I feel better now. Dr. Spates, we're almost done. Is there anyone who should not get the vaccine? Question 15.
So right now, the vaccines have not been studied in children under 16. So we have the Moderna, which is authorized for 18 and older, and then Pfizer is authorized for those 16 and older. Moderna does currently have ongoing studies looking at children between 12 and 17. There are some studies that will be coming soon looking at children younger than 12 that will be on the horizon. But also those that were excluded in the study were immunocompromised patients, those who have recurrent severe infections. They were excluded as well. So again, I think it's a risk versus the benefit that you have to really talk to your healthcare provider to figure out what's the best thing for you.
Quick question on that follow-up. Are any of the new pharmaceuticals or any of the new companies dealing with those age groups, those younger age groups?
Yeah, so there are a couple ways that the younger age group are being introduced, because as you know, legally, we used to be able to use things off-label for children. Now the federal government prohibits that. So we must have the data to support our use in children, as it should be. However, both companies of both sponsors of the emergency use authorized products have increased their age range. So there are currently enrolled 12 to 16-year-olds in the Pfizer study. The data was not adjudicated and used for the authorization, so we could not expand the age group for them. Moderna likewise has increased their age, so there will be subsequent groups that will be brought to the table with the data to support its use. In addition to that, because we're talking about sponsorship trials, the NIH itself and other bodies will actually be doing, not biopharma sponsored, but academic institution sponsored trials, because these products are now either emergency use authorized or will be BLA authorized. So we will have more information. The reason that it didn't roll out is it's the first do no harm. We have a group of people who were not dying at an astronomical rate. We know that of the people who have died from COVID, if you look only at the state of Florida, 85% of the deaths have happened in patients older than 65. So we've prioritized our need to address that group most aggressively. However, we know that the source of the virus can come through kids as young as 2 months old at some of my patients. So that data will be building over time, both by the sponsors of the product and by academic institutions and other private public partnerships.
Real quick on that, Dr. Johnson. And so would you may not know the answer to this, can we expect that to come to trial as fast as it has for those who are 16 and above, or to your knowledge?
Yeah, a lot of these trials are currently ongoing. They're just not in final stage 2 and 3 trials. The other thing that I want to actually pull up, because I just did I'm a Caribbean person, so I just did a Caribbean thing with some international people. The Oxford product is already authorized in neighbor countries of ours. So we have products that are studied differently. I just don't want to talk about that because the FDA hasn't brought that through the correct process for us to use in this country. I suspect that we will have other products, other more stable products that don't require all the refrigeration, that may have been tested in other groups. And if you look around the country, around the world, there are vaccinations programs in certain countries with all sorts of ages, not necessarily based on the rigors and the integrity of the process that we use in this country. So we'll be learning from them as well. So the short answer is we've got to do the work to get the data that we need to vaccinate our children. That is already conceptualized. It's happening. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see those trials that are starting but not enrolling or enrolling early, and that information is coming.
Very good. And I guess just to add my 2 cents to that, in third world countries, many of them don't have places of storage, these sub-zero freezers, et cetera, et cetera. So I can only assume that if the vaccine is going to be there, then it has to be modified or something has to be done in order for it to get in the arms of the people across the water. So
And it is important. I mean, I have to put a plug in because we are our brother's keeper. And it is important that we recognize that while this is all happening, and that is why there are other platforms, there are other modalities other than intramuscular ways to get a vaccine. You know, we've done flu with intranasal injections. One company is looking at an oral injection. And while I don't know if these will be successful, based on this virus that continues to evolve. I'm glad that we are at least recognizing that there are places in sub-Saharan Africa and other places that just don't have the economics that we have. And we must be mindful of that because this is a pandemic. This isn't about the United States and it's not about the Western Hemisphere. This is truly a pandemic and our borders are so wide open that it all influences what happens to us in this country.
Let me throw question 16 at you, Dr. Johnson, while you're on deck. Is it any difference in the effectiveness of the vaccine in the people of different ages, racial backgrounds, sexes, or other differences?
So I think we kind of touched on that a little bit before, and across the board, across ages, across ethnicity, even across chronic conditions in some studies, I'm happy to see that there was difference with regards to its effective data and the safety data across all groups. Again, while those things are discussed as just a global topic, you must have had the infection in the study to have that data reported. So if you were in the placebo group and you happen to be Black and you got the vaccine, that all makes sense. We saw some changes. We saw data that not every group were positive because they weren't exposed to the disease. So that data pool needs to build over time. What's important was who was at the table at the beginning. Dr. Spates talked about these 33 and 40,000 of people who were enrolled in the trial. And that's where the challenge starts. And sometimes we don't have people that are diverse enough to know what that's going to look like when it rolls out in people who look like us. And I'm happy to report that about almost 10% of in both studies were African Americans, which is kind of high for clinical trials, not high enough because we have such a great burden of the disease. We take on the brunt of this disease. If you look at African Americans as a group, we are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized. We are 3 times more likely to die. We need to know as much as we need to know about that. But we did represent a strong 10% in the trials. Moderna's trial was just US based. Pfizer's trial included other countries. So when you look at the ethnic data for other countries in the Pfizer trial, it stood the test of time. The numbers were pretty equivocal. And in Moderna, which again, the pool of people were from this country and still about 10%, almost 10% of people, of African-American people. So I think that it's a plug as a physician scientist to encourage us. It's a double-edged sword, but to encourage us to consider these trials so that we can be part of the data that we use for population medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Willis, will people need to wear a mask after receiving the vaccine?
The answer is yes. We need to continue to wear our mask because, as many of my colleagues have discussed, Mr. Jacob specifically, you can get the vaccine and contract the disease before you actually have the protection to fight the vaccine. You can get the first dose of the vaccine and it does not work completely and totally in all people. And you can think you are protected and get the disease and spread it because you're not wearing masks. And then finally, you can get the 2 doses. And it's still only 94, 95% effective. There's still going to be some people who get both vaccines and they really are not protected. So I believe that, and this is what the CDC says, we should wear the mask until the powers that be, Dr. Kim Barbell-Johnson and a few others, tell us that it's safe, that we have conquered this, that the numbers are going down. And truly, all jokes aside, the researchers and other people will be looking at this very closely. And at some point, they will talk about herd immunity and they will say, we're doing much, much better now. But I think until that time, we need to wear the mask.
Can you speak? We only have 2 more questions left, but before we're going to allow Mr. Jacobs to close us out on those 2 questions. But Dr. Willis, can you speak a little bit on herd immunity? You said it'll get to a place where we will, we've herd immunity from, from all over the place. So can you kind of bring us a sense of clarity on
Well,
herd?
yeah, that's a difficult thing to bring a sense of clarity on because the numbers can be all over the place. But I will tell you, and please invite my other colleagues to comment. The concept of herd immunity is enough people have either had the disease or been immunized and they're protected from the disease that almost everybody is not at risk of getting the disease. And when that happens, perhaps we're not as fearful anymore. There still may be some disease. Everyone might not be protected. There may be new strains that come along, but they would be in isolated pockets so it wouldn't spread like wildfire throughout the country and close the governments down and close the schools down, because there would be enough of the herd that's protected so it doesn't affect everyone. And that, I think, is a reasonable explanation so everyone can understand what that means. And the essence is, and I have to thank you, Reverend Dr. Williams, and the churches, because I think my colleagues would agree, we all know that a lot of trusted information and healthcare information comes from the church, the Black church. So I would really encourage people to listen to this and other information that's presented like this to understand that this may be a rare opportunity for the Black community to take control of this as best they can. Do what you can by protecting your family, wearing the mask, and I would say get that vaccination, because it is affecting us more than others. And with that, I'd like to just thank you.
Okay, we'll close on these two questions. Question 18, Mr. Walgreen, how will Walgreen plan to distribute the vaccine, Mr. Jacobs? So how will that transpire?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about our current phase, how the vaccine is distributed. So it is very restrictive and basically controlled by the allocation by CDC in phase 1A and phase 1B. When we expand to the phase 2 and phase 3 phases, it will be no different than a regular immunization. So it will be readily available in pretty much every store. And people might be thinking, okay, do you have ultra cold freezers in every store to store the Pfizer vaccine, or do you even have freezers for storing the Moderna vaccine? So what we do is a hub and spoke model for the Pfizer vaccine, where we have a central hub that has an ultra cold freezer, and these freezers are like 20 grand a piece per freezer for a tiny freezer that will hold these vaccines. And that hub store will actually store a majority of the vaccine. And also we have spoke stores distributed across the state, multiple stores, where the Pfizer will actually send in shippers, which is also pretty much kept at sub-zero temperature using the dry ice technology. And those will be distributed too. So from a distribution perspective, we don't see any challenges as we expand to all the stores, because we are using this hub and spoke model for Pfizer. The Moderna is going to be pretty simple. Every store every pharmacy has a freezer, because the Zostavax product we used to protect shingles was kept in a freezer, and also we have some other vaccines that are frozen. So we already have that equipment in the pharmacies. So the Moderna can be stored in every single pharmacy. So I think right now the plan is to make sure that we complete our phase 1A and phase 1B, and then as we move into phase 2 and phase 3 pieces, and the vaccines are readily available for us to store and distribute within our locations, we will be able to do that.
Then we will give you the last question again. Do you need both doses of the vaccine? I think we know the answer to that, but go ahead.
Yeah, so from a clinical data perspective, I know that Ms. Johnson was talking all about data and science and all these pieces. The clinical data from our trials shows that the maximum protection is provided when they get the 2 doses. So it is critically important that if you're getting the Pfizer vaccine, make sure that you are getting the second dose within that 21-day time frame, and for Moderna, within that 28-day time frame. I know that there could be things happening that we may not be able to get within that 21-day time frame. We have to make sure that we make every effort to get that vaccine, second dose of vaccine, closer to that timeline. So to put it in simple terms, yes, we need to get the 2 doses to get the maximum protection.
Final question. What happens if I'm supposed to be back 3 weeks later and I come 4 weeks later?
So right now, the clinical data basically suggests that, if we don't need to redo the course, which means that you don't have to get the first dose start all over again. As soon as we can get it, we can receive the second dose of vaccine. That's the clinical guidelines put in place.
And there's a 4-day window for both doses with both vaccines with the second dose.
Okay, awesome.
Pastor Williams?
Yes, go ahead, Doc.
I did want to add one thing in regards to the vaccine. It is also postulated that the second dose, you may get more severe side effects, or more side effects, I won't say severe. And so the recommendation is that you get that vaccine close to the end of your work week, so that if you do have side effects and symptoms, that you can rest and recuperate. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I think we stated it, but a lot of hesitancy to the vaccine is because we don't have any long-term efficacy or safety data. So we don't know how long the immunity lasts. We don't know what the long-term side effects are, but that information is forthcoming. As more people begin to get vaccinated, we will have more data, and we will be able to, help individuals make informed decisions about the vaccine.
And I'm glad you said that, because, we study vaccines, I think, as we pay our taxes, which is in arrears. And so you have to go through it, calculate, determine what's what, make notations of it. And then what it does is that it helps you to look forward. It betters your opportunity of looking forward, but that's as a result of the data that's been received and formulated in arrears. So very well said. Well, listen, I want to give you guys the opportunity to just give a parting comment, and then we're going to leave. We'll start with you, Dr. Johnson, go with you, Dr. Spates, Dr. Willis, and then Mr. Jacobs.
Like Dr. Willis, I can't thank you enough for this forum. One of the joys, probably one of the few joys of this pandemic, has been the opportunity to be proximal to people who look like me, to encourage them, to take care of them, and to be part of the faith community. I think this is a space that this is where this information belongs, in my opinion. And I thank you for stepping up to the table and having the foresight last year to bring this forum. And the timing was perfect, because I think it's very timely information. You have been a leader in this community for things like this, and I wish that we had more like you. But I just want to say thank you, first of all. And second of all, I want to just encourage those who are listening. Just like I don't go to the milkman or my taxman or my attorney to get spiritual advice, I go to my subject matter expert, my spiritual leaders. I encourage you to make sure that you're getting your advice from the right people, the people who have the information and who can translate that information in a way that makes sense to you. This is not one size fits all. And I don't think, while we're all advocates for vaccines, that we're saying that this is for everyone. This is a conversation that you need to have in a trusted space. And whether it's this or the other things that have made this so important, the chronic diseases that are underlying in populations that have created more problems with COVID, the hypertension, the diabetes, the obesity, the things, the smoking, the COPD, that has created havoc in those patients who then get COVID on top of that. This is a perfect time for us to continue this conversation and to push the envelope so that we're talking about making ourselves as a community healthier, so that we are not at the mercy of these things, because we are healthier. And I think in being healthier, we will be able to push this conversation further along and decrease some of the health disparities that we continue to see. So thank you, and we are here for you.
Dr. Spates.
Thank you, Pastor Williams. I want to say, when you called me with this idea, I was excited and elated and just glad to be a part of this panel. And Dr. Johnson, Dr. Willis, Mr. Jacob, I'm so honored to be on this platform with you today. I would like to say, if we look back at 2020, I know a lot of us have said 2020 is gone and we don't want to look back. We want to keep moving. So many of us have lost loved ones, friends throughout the year of 2020. And I think the advent of this vaccine will help us save lives. And I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you are well informed, that you have the information that you need to make an informed decision for yourself and for your family. And as Dr. Johnson said, it may not be for you, but please just make sure you have the right information so that you can make the best decision, so that we don't continue to have so many lives lost just senselessly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spates. Dr. Willis.
Again, thanks to my distinguished colleagues and you, Reverend Dr. Williams. I will end by saying, although we talked earlier about the numbers of Black people who did not want to get the vaccine, that number has drifted down over the months. But there's another group of Black people who aren't saying, I will never get it. They're in this, I want to wait and see what might happen. That is the biggest group amongst African Americans now. And I would echo what Dr. Spates and Dr. Barbara Johnson have just said. Keep your ear to the ground, look for trusted sources of information, call your own healthcare provider. If you have not gotten it and you aren't interested, put yourself in that wait and see category and gather information. And I think we will see our way through this. So thank you very much.
Mr. Jacob.
I want to thank Pastor Williams and Dr. Spates for inviting us to this forum. It's the first time me attending one of these, and I'm really privileged to be part of this. You know, we heard a lot of great information from a lot of clinicians, doctors around the COVID-19 vaccine. I just wanted to call out two things. One, Dr. Willis said, you know, when you look at the data of about 1 million people that got immunized in the last 3 weeks, the number of deaths reported were, you know, maybe we can count in one hand. Whereas, you know, we had 4,000 plus deaths happening every single day across the country. So, you know, getting the vaccine definitely will protect us, saving lives. You know, the second thing, you know, this was mentioned by both Dr. Johnson and Dr. Willis about, you know, getting the knowledge from the experts. You know, we are living in a world, everything is in the fingertips. So when you Google it, when you go to Facebook, when you go to Twitter, you know, you will hear things that are people making things up. Any doubts, please make sure that you are reaching out to your resources, your clinicians, you know, pharmacist. You have a pharmacy within 2 miles of where you live. So any doubt you have, you know, any questions you have about the vaccines, go into one of the pharmacies that is readily available. Use those resources to, you know, clear any of those fears and myths and get the truth from those clinical experts. And thank you for this opportunity, and I'll pass it back to you, Pastor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. And I pray that this has fulfilled the purpose of really just informing our community. One of the things that I wanted to do was to make sure that people of color heard from people of color, our professionals. And we're all stewards of our community. We're all public servants. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that as best as we can, that we lead people this the preacher coming out in the path of righteousness for his name's sake.